I heard the doorbell ring at 7:30 on a Tuesday morning, and something in my stomach just dropped. You know that feeling. It is that heavy, electric air right before a thunderstorm rolls in. Thick and wrong. I had lived in my mother's house for 2 years by then. It was the home she left to me after she passed, and in all that time, I had never once had an unexpected visitor at that hour. My neighbors are quiet people. My friends always call first. And my sister, Linda, well, she had not spoken to me in 3 long years. Not since she skipped our mother's funeral. But when I looked through the peephole, there she was. She was standing on my porch with a minivan full of boxes and a husband who looked like he was just waiting for a bus. Linda had that look on her face, the one she wears when she has already decided that her needs are more important than the truth. She thought she could just drive 4 hours and take over, because for 60 years I was the sister who always said yes. But that morning, everything changed. Before I tell you how this confrontation on my porch turned into a legal battle over a $450,000 estate, please take a moment to comment and let me know which city or state you are watching from today. I love hearing from you all. The doorbell rang at 7:30 on a Tuesday morning. It was a sharp, insistent sound that sliced right through the silence of my bedroom. I remember sitting up instantly. My heart was thumping against my ribs. Something in my stomach just dropped before I even got out of bed. I do not know how to explain that feeling. It was not exactly dread. It was not exactly fear. It was more like the way the air feels right before a massive thunderstorm rolls in over the plains. It was heavy. It was electric. It was just wrong. By that time, I had lived in my mother's house for 2 years. This was the house she left to me when she passed away. In all that time, I had never once had an unexpected visitor at such an early hour. My neighbors are quiet, retired people who value their privacy as much as I do. My friends always knew to call or text before stopping by. And then, there was my sister, Linda. Linda had not spoken to me in 3 years. I pulled on my robe and walked down the hallway slowly. The morning light was coming through the kitchen window in long, pale strips. I could smell the coffee. I had set it on a timer the night before, and it was just beginning to brew. I tried to tell myself it was probably just a delivery driver. Maybe a package was being dropped off early. I told myself I was being ridiculous for feeling so uneasy. Still, I looked through the peephole anyway. My breath caught in my throat. It was my sister, and she was not alone. Her husband, Gary, was standing right behind her on the porch. Beyond them, I could see a minivan parked in my driveway. It was packed. I could see the outlines of boxes stacked all the way to the roof in the back. Linda was wearing that specific expression she always wore when she had already made a decision. It was a look she knew I would not like. Chin up, shoulders back. Her eyes were just a little bit too steady. It was the way a person looks when they have spent hours rehearsing what they are about to say. 3 years. I stood there, frozen behind the door, thinking about those 3 years. 3 years of absolute silence. I thought about the unanswered calls I made during our mother's long illness. I thought about the empty chairs at the funeral. I thought about the handwritten letter I had sent her. The one that came back to me, unopened and cold. 3 years. And now, here she was. She was standing on my porch at 7:30 in the morning with a van full of her life, acting as if she belonged here. I finally reached out and opened the door. She smiled first. That was the thing that hit me the hardest. She smiled as if no time had passed at all. She smiled as if we had just seen each other last Sunday for brunch. "We need to talk," she said. "Can we come in?" I did not move from the doorway. I did not step aside. In that moment, I realized that I knew how these stories usually go. I knew the version where the sister steps aside and says, "Of course. Come in, sit down, let me get you some coffee." And then, that sister spends the next 6 months of her life trying to undo that one single moment of hesitation. I had read enough. I had lived enough. And honestly, I had grieved enough to know better. Stepping aside was not what I was going to do. I stood there, perfectly still. behind the heavy oak door. My hand was hovering just inches away from the brass lock, but I could not bring myself to turn it. Not yet. I leaned forward, pressing my forehead against the cool wood, and looked through the small glass peephole. Outside, the morning was beautiful. It was a typical crisp Tuesday in our neighborhood. The dew was still clinging to the grass, and the sun was just starting to burn through the early mist. But that peace was shattered by the sight in my driveway. There was a silver minivan parked right there, blocking the path to the garage. It was an older model, a bit dusty, with a dent in the rear bumper. And it was packed. I do not mean there were a few suitcases in the back. No. I mean, it was crammed to the very ceiling. I could see brown cardboard boxes. Some were taped shut with heavy silver duct tape. Others were overflowing with what looked like blankets and pillows. I saw the corner of a floor lamp pressed against the side window. I saw a stack of plastic bins. It looked like someone had taken a whole apartment and shoved it into a space meant for a family of 5. And then there was Linda. She was standing on the porch, barely 2 feet away from me. She looked older, yes. Her hair was a bit thinner, and she was wearing a sensible cardigan that looked like it had seen better days. But she still had that posture. Linda always stood as if she were the most important person in the room, even when she was standing on a porch she had not visited in years. She was checking her reflection in the glass of the storm door, tucking a stray hair behind her ear. Behind her stood Gary. Gary was her second husband. He was a man who always seemed to be fading into the background. He was wearing a faded baseball cap and a pair of jeans that were a little too loose. He was not looking at the door. He was looking at his watch, then looking back at the van, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. He looked like a man who was ready to be anywhere else. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. This was not a social visit. People do not show up at 7:30 on a Tuesday morning with a van full of boxes just to say hello. They do not bring their whole lives with them if they only plan to stay for coffee. This was a move. I realized then that this was a planned invasion. Linda had not called. She had not asked. She had simply assumed. She had assumed that because I was the younger sister, because I was the one who stayed behind, I would naturally just open the door and let her take over. I thought about my quiet life. I thought about the way I had finally found a sense of order in this house after the chaos of the last few years. I had my routine. I had my garden. I had my peace. And there she was, standing on the threshold, ready to bring her drama and her boxes into my sanctuary. The doorbell rang again. It was longer this time, more insistent. "Sarah! I know you are in there," Linda called out. Her voice was muffled by the door, but I could still hear that sharp, demanding edge. "The coffee is brewing. I can smell it from here. Come on, open up." I took a deep breath. I felt the weight of 60 years of history pressing down on me. 60 years of being the sister who smoothed things over. 60 years of being the one who said, "It is okay, do not worry about it." But as I looked at that silver minivan, something in me snapped. It was a quiet snap. Not loud, not angry, just a realization that the person I used to be is no longer here. I was not that girl anymore. I was a woman who had earned this home. I was a woman who had earned my peace. I finally reached for the lock. I did not do it because I wanted to let her in. I did it because I was tired of hiding in my own hallway. I was ready to see exactly what she thought she was doing on my property. I stood in the doorway, my hand tight on the handle, looking at my sister. She was smiling, but it was a thin smile. It was the kind of smile that did not reach her eyes. "What are you doing here, Linda?" I asked. My voice was steadier than I expected it to be. She let out a little huff, as if my question were the most ridiculous thing in the world. "Is that any way to greet your sister? We have been on the road since 3 in the morning. Gary's back is killing him. Can we please just come inside and sit down?" Inside. She kept using that word. Inside. But as I looked at her, I did not see the sister standing in front of me. I saw the 3 years of silence that stood between us. I thought back to the summer our mother first got sick. It started with little things. Forgetting her keys, getting confused at the grocery store, I had called Linda that June. I remember sitting at this very kitchen table, staring out at the oak tree, telling her that Mom needed help. Linda's response back then was short. She said she was busy. She said she had a cruise planned. She said that I was exaggerating, that Mom was just getting older, and I was being too sensitive. Then came the fall. Mom fell and broke her hip. I spent 14 days in the hospital, sleeping in a chair that felt like it was made of rocks. I called Linda every single day. One day, she stopped picking up. She stopped returning my texts. She vanished. For 14 months, I was the only one here. I was the one who managed the doctors. I was the one who made sure the insurance papers were filed. I was the one who sat with Mom through the long nights when she did not know where she was. I was the one who held her hand when she finally took her last breath. And Linda? Linda was a ghost. I thought about the funeral. It was a grey, drizzly day in November. I had saved a seat for her in the front row. I kept looking at the back of the church, hoping to see her walk through those doors. I wanted her there. I needed my sister, but the seat stayed empty. The only thing she sent was a generic card with a pre-printed message. No note. No, I am sorry. Just a signature. I even tried one last time. A few months after the funeral, I wrote her a long letter. I told her I missed her. I told her I did not want us to be like this. I sent it by certified mail to her last known address. 2 weeks later, it came back to me. The envelope was yellowed at the edges, stamped refused in bright red ink. She had refused my letter. She had refused my grief. She had refused our mother. And now, 3 years later, she was standing on my porch because it was convenient for her. She was here because she had run out of options, and she figured I was her best safety net. 3 years, Linda, I said, my voice dropping an octave. You did not answer my calls when she was dying. You did not come to the service. You sent back my letters unopened. Linda's face shifted. The smile vanished, replaced by a look of annoyance. Oh, Sarah, don't start with the drama. I told you. Things were hard for us back then. Gary lost his job, and I was depressed. I could not handle the stress of a sick room. You were always the strong one. You were always the one Mom relied on. The strong one. That is what people say when they want to excuse their own selfishness. They call you strong, so they don't have to feel guilty about leaving you to carry the weight alone. I looked past her at Gary, who was now leaning against the minivan, staring at his phone. I looked at the boxes. I realized that to Linda, I was not a sister. I was a resource. I was in a house with an extra bedroom. I was a solution to her financial problems. She did not care about the 3 years of silence. She did not care about the holes in my heart. She only cared about the fact that I had something she wanted. I am not letting you in, Linda, I said. She blinked, her mouth falling open slightly. What? Sarah, don't be ridiculous. We have nowhere else to go. We already gave up our apartment in the city. We have a van full of our belongings. You cannot just leave your own family on the street. You left me a long time ago, I replied. And you left Mom when she needed you most. You made your choice 3 years ago. I am just making mine today. I felt a strange sense of clarity. For the first time in my life, the guilt was not mine to carry. The silence of the last 3 years was not my fault. It was a wall that she had built, brick by brick. And I was not going to be the one to tear it down just because she needed a place to park her minivan. I stood there for a few more seconds, my heart hammering against my ribs like a bird in a cage. I could see Linda through the glass. She was adjusting her cardigan, smoothing out the wrinkles as if she were preparing to walk onto a stage. Finally, I reached out. I turned the deadbolt. The sound of the metal sliding back felt incredibly loud in the morning quiet. It felt like a point of no return. I opened the door, but I did not open it wide. I kept my hand firmly on the edge of the frame, occupying the space. I was the barrier. Linda's reaction was instant. She beamed. She flashed that wide, bright smile that she had used since we were children to get her way. It was a practiced smile. It was a smile that reached for warmth, but felt as cold as a frozen lake. She looked at me as if the last 3 years had never happened. She looked at me as if we had just finished a pleasant phone call 10 minutes ago. "Sarah! Oh, it is so good to see you," she said. Her voice was pitched a little too high, a little too cheerful for 7:30 in the morning. "You look wonderful. A little tired, maybe, but wonderful." I did not smile back. I did not move an inch. I felt the cool morning air rushing into the hallway, smelling of damp grass and the exhaust from her idling minivan. "We need to talk," Linda continued, her smile flickering just for a millisecond when I did not invite her in. "It has been a long drive. We left the city at 3 in the morning. Gary is exhausted, and my knees are just aching from being cramped up in that van. Can we please come inside? Let's sit down in the kitchen and talk like adults." Talk like adults. I knew that phrase. Linda used it whenever she wanted to make me feel like I was being difficult for having feelings. She used it to suggest that my hurt, my anger, and my grief were childish emotions that needed to be set aside for her convenience. I stood my ground. I thought about the version of this story that Linda expected. She expected me to step back. She expected me to sigh, roll my eyes, and say, "Fine, come in, the coffee is almost ready." She expected me to spend the next hour listening to her excuses while I served her breakfast in our mother's kitchen. She thought that because I had always said yes for 60 years, I would say yes today. But I had lived through too much to play that role anymore. I had sat in this house alone for 2 years. I had grieved alone. I had cleaned out Mom's closets alone. I had found a strength in that solitude that Linda did not know about. "I am talking to you right now, Linda," I said. My voice was calm. It was flat. It was the voice of a woman who was no longer interested in the game. "I am standing right here. You can say whatever you came to say." Linda's smile dropped a little further. She looked over her shoulder at Gary, who was still standing by the van, looking at a neighbor's dog. Then she looked back at me, her eyes narrowing just a fraction. "Sarah, come on," she said, her tone shifting from cheerful to slightly annoyed. "It is cold out here. My neighbors in the city would never dream of leaving family on the porch. What will people think if they see us standing here like this?" I looked out at the street. I saw Mrs. Higgins 2 houses down, picking up her morning paper. I did not care what she thought. I did not care what the whole world thought. For the first time in my 63 years, the only opinion that mattered was my own. I realized in that moment that the threshold of a house is a powerful thing. It is the line between what you allow into your life and what you keep out. For 60 years, I had let Linda cross that line whenever she pleased. I had let her bring her chaos, her demands, and her selfishness right into the center of my world. But not today. "Tell me why you are here, Linda," I said. I repeated it slowly, letting each word hang in the air. "Tell me exactly what is in that van, and why you thought you could show up here without a single word of warning." The rehearsed smile was completely gone now. In its place was the real Linda, the one who believed that the world owed her a living, the one who believed that my life was just a backup plan for hers. Linda took a deep breath. She crossed her arms over her chest, and the cardboard box scent of the minivan seemed to cling to her clothes. "Fine," she said. Her voice had lost its fake cheer and turned into that familiar defensive whine. "If you want to be difficult, we can talk here. We have had some financial difficulties, Sarah. Serious ones." She went on to explain that Gary's business had finally collapsed. It was a story I had heard in various forms for 20 years. Gary always had a big idea that just needed a little more capital. Gary always had a partner who did him wrong. But this time it was different. This time, they had lost their house. They had filed for bankruptcy. They had spent the last 2 weeks living out of a motel on the edge of town until their money ran out. "We are family," Linda said, and she used that word like a weapon. "Whatever happened in the past, we are still sisters." And I thought about this house. It is so big. It has 4 bedrooms, Sarah. 4 bedrooms! And it is just you in here. Just you. Sitting in all this space. I felt a surge of heat rise in my neck. "Just me. It is a waste," she continued, her voice gaining strength as she convinced herself of her own logic. It is a waste for you to be here, all by yourself, when your own sister is facing homelessness. And technically, Mom always said she wanted this house to be a place where we both felt welcome. She always said she wanted us to take care of each other. I couldn't believe my ears. I really couldn't. Stop right there, I said. Linda blinked. She was not used to being interrupted. This house is not just sitting here, I told her. I stepped forward just an inch, making her take a half step back on the porch. I live here. This is my home. I moved back here 4 years ago to take care of Mom when she got sick. I gave up my apartment. I put my life on hold for 14 months. I was the one who changed her sheets. I was the one who managed her morphine. I was the one who was here at 4 in the morning when she was terrified and didn't know who I was. I paused, letting the weight of those 14 months sit between us. You were sent a copy of the will, Linda. You know that Mom left this house to me. She left it to me because I was the one who showed up. She left it to me so that I would have a place to live after I gave everything up for her. It was not an accident. It was a choice she made when she was perfectly of sound mind. Linda's face twisted into a scowl. She was old, Sarah. She was sick. You were there, whispering in her ear every day. How do I know you didn't talk her into it? How do I know you didn't take advantage of her being confused? The audacity of it was breathtaking. She was accusing me of the very thing she was trying to do right now, manipulate a situation for her own gain. Mom was never confused about who cared for her, I said. My voice was trembling now, but not from fear. It was from a deep, righteous anger. And she was never confused about who didn't. You didn't come to the hospital once. You didn't even come to her funeral, Linda. You skipped our mother's funeral because you said you couldn't handle the negative energy. Linda waved her hand dismissively. That is in the past. Why are you so obsessed with the past? We are talking about the present. We are talking about the fact that I am your sister, and I have a van full of my belongings and nowhere to put them. I thought you would be a Christian about this. I thought you would open your heart. She was trying every trick in the book. The guilt trip. The religious card. The family bond. She was throwing everything at the wall to see what would stick. You didn't come here because you miss me, I said. You didn't come here to make amends. You came here because you ran out of people to borrow money from. You came here because you thought I was an easy mark. You thought you could just park that van, move into the guest room, and spend the next 10 years making my life miserable while you lived for free. Linda looked at Gary. Gary looked at the ground. He didn't say a word. He knew better than to get between us when Linda was in this state. I am not saying yes, Linda, I said. I felt a strange sense of peace as I said it. It was like a heavy coat had been lifted off my shoulders. The answer is no. You are not moving in. You are not putting your boxes in my garage. You are not taking over this house. Linda's eyes turned cold. The desperation was being replaced by something much sharper, something much more dangerous. You will regret this, Sarah, she hissed. You think you can just keep everything for yourself? You think I'm just going to walk away and let you have a $450,000 house while I have nothing? We will see about that. We will just see what a judge has to say about how you handled Mom's affairs. I watched her walk back toward the minivan. Her steps were heavy and angry. I realized then that the morning was far from over. In fact, the real battle was only just beginning. I stood in the frame of the front door, looking out at the life that was trying to force its way back into mine. Behind Linda, Gary was still hovering near the silver minivan. He looked like a man who had been told to stay in the background until he was needed to carry heavy boxes. He looked out of place in our neighborhood. He looked like he did not belong on this street, with its manicured lawns and its quiet, predictable mornings. Linda took a step toward the threshold. She was reaching for the door handle, her fingers twitching as if she already possessed the keys. But I did not budge. I held that door frame with a grip that felt like iron. My knuckles were white, but I did not care. Gary stays by the van, I said. My voice was low. It was steady. It was the kind of voice our mother used when she was finished negotiating. Linda stopped. Her eyes went wide, flashing with a mix of surprise and growing anger. Sarah, for heaven's sake! It is cold out here. He is your brother-in-law. He is family. You are really going to make him stand on the driveway like a stranger? He is a stranger to this house, I replied. He has not set foot on this property in 4 years. He did not come when the roof leaked. He did not come when Mom needed her ramp built. He is not coming in today. Gary looked up then. He had heard me. He didn't look angry. He just looked tired. He looked like a man who had lost his own home and was now waiting for his wife to win him a new one. He looked back down at his phone and took a long drag from a cigarette he had just lit. The smoke drifted up into the clear morning air, a grey smudge against the blue sky. And as for you, Linda, I continued, looking my sister right in the eye, I will give you 5 minutes. Not in the house, not in the kitchen. We can sit on the porch. Linda looked at me as if I had just spoken a foreign language. She looked at the 2 wooden chairs sitting on the porch. Those chairs had been there for 20 years. Our father had built them from cedar. They were weathered now, a soft silver grey colour. Our mother used to sit in the one on the left every single evening during the summer, watching the fireflies and listening to the cicadas. 5 minutes? Linda hissed. You are giving your only sister 5 minutes on the porch? Like a solicitor? Like someone selling vacuum cleaners? The clock is already ticking, Linda, I said. I stepped out onto the porch and closed the front door behind me. I heard the lock click. I wanted that barrier between her and my sanctuary. I sat down in the right-hand chair, leaving the one on the left for her. Linda stood there for a moment, her chest heaving with indignation. She looked at the closed door, then at me, then at the chair. Finally, she sat down. She sat on the very edge of the wood, as if she were afraid the chair might collapse under the weight of her presence. The neighborhood was waking up around us. It was a peaceful symphony of suburban life. I heard a sprinkler system click on 2 houses down, that rhythmic, ticking sound that meant the day was truly beginning. I heard a car engine start somewhere on the next block. A blue jay landed on the bird feeder in the yard, chirping loudly before flying away toward the big oak tree. Neither of us said anything for a long minute. The silence was heavy. It was full of the things we had not said for 3 years. It was full of the resentment that had built up like rust on an old gate. I know I was not there, Linda said finally. She was not looking at me. She was looking out at the yard, at the flower beds that I had spent the last 2 months weeding and mulching. I know that I have to live with that choice. Yes, I said. You do. Things with Gary were so bad back then, Sarah. Truly bad. We were losing the business. We were drowning in debt. I was barely keeping my own head above water. I felt like if I came here, if I saw how sick she was, I would just break. I couldn't handle one more thing. She paused, waiting for me to offer her comfort. She wanted me to say, I understand, Linda. It is okay. You were going through a lot, but I did not say it. I sat there and watched a ladybug crawl along the arm of my chair. I thought about how many times I had been the one to break, but I didn't have the luxury of walking away. I had to pick up the pieces and keep going because there was no one else to do it. That is not an excuse, Linda said, her voice cracking just a little. I am just trying to explain why I disappeared. I understand things were hard for you, I said. Linda flinched. She recognized that tone. It was the tone of someone who was acknowledging a fact, but not offering a pardon. I had learned in the last few years that the truth, stated plainly and without an apology, is sometimes the only language that people like Linda can actually hear. What is in the van, Linda? I asked again. I wanted to keep her focused on the reality of the situation. She turned to look at me then. Her eyes were red-rimmed. Some of our things. The most important things. The rest is in a storage unit that we cannot afford to pay for next month, I thought. I thought if you had any room, even just for a little while. In the basement or the garage. No, I said. Sarah, please. Just the garage. It is just sitting there empty. It is not empty, I told her. It is full of my life. It is full of the things I am keeping. And more importantly, it is my garage. I am not saying no because I am angry, although I am. I am not saying no because I want to punish you, although I will not pretend that a part of me does not feel that way. I leaned forward, looking her directly in the face. I want you to hear me, Linda. I want you to hear me, because you are my sister, and I do not want you to walk away from this porch having misunderstood where I stand. This is my home. Mom left it to me because I was here. I earned it in the hardest way a person can earn anything. And I will not have it taken from me by someone who thinks 3 years of silence can just be forgiven over a morning conversation because it happens to be convenient for them. Linda was quiet for a long time. A long time. She was so quiet that I could hear the wind whistling through the screen door. The sprinkler 2 houses down completed its cycle and clicked off, leaving the air feeling even more silent than before. I thought you would say yes, she said softly. Her voice sounded small now. It lacked the sharp edge of the adult she had tried to be 5 minutes ago. Because you always say yes. That was it. That right there was the most honest thing she had said all morning. I know, I said. But the woman who always said yes does not live here anymore. She died around the same time Mom did. As I sat there on the porch with Linda, the memories of those 14 months came rushing back to me. They were not soft memories. They were not the kind of memories you see in greeting cards or sentimental movies. They were memories of sweat, tears, and the smell of antiseptic and stale soup. Linda looked at me, and I could tell she saw the change in my face. She saw the hardness in my eyes. She didn't understand it. To her, those 14 months were just a gap in time. They were a period when she was busy elsewhere. But to me, they were my entire world. You think I had it easy? I asked her. The question was quiet, but it had a sharp edge to it. I didn't say that, Sarah, she muttered. But you think it. You think I just sat here in this big house, drinking tea and waiting for the end. You have no idea what it actually cost me to be the person who stayed. I started to count the cost for her. Not because I wanted her pity, but because she needed to understand the foundation this house was built on. 14 months, Linda. That is 426 days. I spent every single one of them inside these walls, or inside a hospital room. Do you remember the month of October 2 years ago? While you were posting photos of your weekend trip to the mountains, I was sitting in a plastic chair in the intensive care unit. I was watching a monitor beep, wondering if every breath Mom took was going to be her last. I thought about the night Mom got confused for the first time. Truly confused. It was 2 o'clock in the morning. She had woken up and didn't know where she was. She thought I was a stranger who had broken into her house. She was terrified. She was screaming for her mother. I had to sit on the floor next to her bed for 4 hours, speaking in a low, calm voice, telling her she was safe, until she finally fell asleep holding my hand so hard that her fingernails left marks in my skin. I didn't have a husband to lean on, I told Linda. I didn't have anyone to take the night shift, so I could get 5 hours of uninterrupted sleep. I was the nurse. I was the cook. I was the maid. I was the person who had to explain to the doctors that her insurance wouldn't cover the new medication. I was the one who had to hold her up in the shower when she was too weak to stand on her own. I remembered the smell of the house back then. It was a heavy, sweet smell of sickness and old age. I remembered the way my back ached from lifting her. I remembered the way my eyes burned from crying in the laundry room so she wouldn't see me being weak. You talk about family, I said, my voice rising just a little bit. But family is a verb, Linda. It is something you do. It is not just a word you use when you need a place to stay. You surrendered your right to call this house ours the moment you decided that your comfort was more important than her care. Linda was looking at her lap now. She was picking at a loose thread on her cardigan. I sent money, she whispered. You sent 2 checks, I reminded her. One for $500 and one for $200. $700 in 14 months. That didn't even cover the cost of her specialized bed linens and the co-pays for her physical. Do you know how much I spent of my own savings to keep this house running? Do you know how much of my $401k I had to withdraw just to make sure she could stay at home instead of being sent to a state facility? I had spent over $40,000 of my own retirement money. I had sacrificed my own financial future to give our mother a dignified end in the place she loved. I had earned every brick of this house. I had earned the right to sit in this chair and tell the world to go away. This house is my inheritance, I said firmly. But it wasn't a gift. It was a trade. I gave Mom my life for over a year, and she gave me her home in return. It was a fair trade. It was the only way she knew how to thank me for being the only one who showed up. I looked out at the silver minivan again. It looked small and insignificant compared to the memories of the last few years. You think you can just show up with a van full of boxes and a rehearsed apology and expect me to hand over half of what I worked so hard to protect? You think that 3 years of silence can be erased because you are family? I shook my head slowly. No, Linda. That is not how the world works. And that is certainly not how this house works. When Mom signed that will, she knew exactly what she was doing. She knew she was giving me a sanctuary. She knew she was giving me a place where I would never have to be at the mercy of someone else's selfishness ever again. I stood up then. My 5 minutes were up. My legs felt strong. My heart felt clear. I need you to leave now, I said. Linda looked up, her face pale. Sarah, please. Just let us stay for one night. Just one night, so we can figure out where to go. No, I said. If I let you stay for one night, you will stay for a week. If you stay for a week, you will stay forever. I am not opening that door, Linda. Not today. Not tomorrow. I walked back to the front door. I put my hand on the handle. There is a Motel 6 about 10 miles down the highway, I told her. It is clean, and it is cheap. You and Gary should go there. And Linda, do not come back here. If you show up on my porch again without an invitation, I will call the police. I am serious. I didn't wait for her to answer. I opened the door, stepped inside, and closed it. I locked the deadbolt. I locked the chain. And then I leaned my back against the wood and listened. I heard Linda's footsteps on the porch. They were heavy. I heard her say something to Gary, her voice muffled and sharp. I heard the car doors slam. 1, then 2. I heard the engine of the minivan groan as it started up. I stayed there, pressed against the door, until I heard the sound of the tires on the gravel driveway fading away into the distance. The house was quiet again. It was my house. It was my silence. And for the first time in 60 years, I knew exactly what it was worth. That one sentence from Linda hung in the humid morning air like a thick fog. I thought you would say yes, because you always say yes. I sat there on that cedar chair, and for a moment I could not breathe. It was not because I was angry. It was because she was right. That was the most honest, most brutal thing my sister had said in over 30 years. She had not come here because she loved me. She had not come here because she missed the home we grew up in. She had come here because she had spent 60 years studying me like a predator studies its prey. She had made a calculation. She had looked at her bank balance, looked at her packed minivan, and thought to herself, Sarah will let us in. Sarah always lets me in. I began to look back through the decades. It was like watching a movie of my own life. But seeing it clearly for the first time, I realized that I had not just been a good sister. I had been an enabler. I had spent 60 years building the very pedestal that Linda was now trying to push me off of. I remembered when we were just children, maybe 7 and 10 years old. Linda had eaten all of her Halloween candy in 2 days, while I had carefully saved mine in a shoebox under my bed. When hers was gone, she cried to our mother, saying it was not fair that I had so much while she had none. And what did I do? I said yes. I gave her half of my candy. I thought I was being kind. I did not realize I was teaching her that my hard work was actually her property. I remembered our 20s. Linda had married her first husband, a man who had a wandering eye and an even more wandering hand when it came to her savings account. She would call me at 2 in the morning, sobbing that her rent check had bounced. And I said yes. I worked double shifts at the diner to send her money that I knew I would never see again. I told myself it was what family did. I did not realize I was teaching her that I was her personal insurance policy. I remembered the holiday dinners. Oh, those dinners were legendary in our family for all the wrong reasons. Linda would show up late, bringing drama the way other people bring a bottle of wine or a pumpkin pie. She would pick a fight with our aunt, or she would make a scene about how little attention she was getting, and every time, I was the one who smoothed it over. I was the one who pulled her aside and told her it was okay. I was the one who apologized to everyone else for her behavior. I said yes to her chaos because I was too afraid of the silence that would follow if I said no. I sat there on the porch, the memory of 60 years of yes pressing down on my chest like a physical weight. Every time I had covered for her, every time I had lied to Mom to protect Linda's reputation, every time I had cleaned up a mess that I had not made, Linda saw my silence as hesitation. She leaned forward, sensing an opening. Her eyes were wide and pleading now, that old, practiced look of a wounded puppy. "Sarah," she whispered, "we are 63 and 66 years old. We are the only ones left. You cannot let 60 years of sisterhood end like this. Just think of the childhood we shared. Think of the nights we spent whispering in our twin beds in the upstairs room. You were always my protector. You were always the one I could count on when the world got too loud." She was trying to use my own memories against me. She was trying to weaponize the very love I had given her. "I am thinking about it, Linda," I said. My voice was quiet, but it was as sharp as a razor. "I am thinking about every single time I said yes to you, and I am realizing that every yes I gave you was a no I was giving to myself. Every time I helped you out of a hole you dug for yourself, I was telling you that you did not have to grow up. I was telling you that my boundaries did not matter." I stood up from the chair. I felt a strange, electric current running through my veins. It was the feeling of 60 years of repressed truth finally reaching the surface. "You did not come here because you value our 60 years of sisterhood," I told her. "You came here because you ran out of people who would believe your lies. You came here because you made a calculation that I was still that 10-year-old girl who would give you half her candy just to make you stop crying." Linda's face shifted. The wounded puppy look vanished in an instant, replaced by a cold, hard mask of resentment. "You have changed," she snapped. "This house has made you cold. You have become just like Mom, stubborn and selfish, holding on to things that should be shared. If being like Mom means protecting the life I have built," I said, "then I will take that as a compliment. But the answer is still no, Linda. The era of always saying yes ended at 7:30 this morning." I saw the realization hit her. For the first time in her life, the engine of her manipulation had stalled. The sister who always provided the safety net had finally stepped away, and Linda was left staring into the abyss of her own choices. The argument did not end quietly. Linda was not the type of person to go gently into the night, or in this case, gently down the driveway. When she realized that her emotional appeals were not working, the storm finally broke. "Fine!" she screamed. Her voice was so loud that I saw Mr. Henderson across the street stop his lawnmower to look our way. "Keep your precious house. Keep your lonely, empty life. I hope you are happy sitting in here with your memories while your only sister sleeps in a car." She was sobbing now, but they were the loud, theatrical sobs of someone who was still hoping for an audience. She grabbed her purse from the porch railing with such force that a small bottle of hand sanitizer flew out and skittered across the wooden planks. "Gary!" she yelled toward the minivan. "Gary! Get the engine started. We are not staying where we are not wanted. We are leaving this hateful place." Gary did not move quickly. He moved with the slow, resigned pace of a man who had seen this performance 1,000 times before. He tossed his cigarette butt into the street, climbed into the driver's seat, and started the engine. The minivan let out a puff of dark exhaust that smelled of old oil and desperation. Linda turned back to me one last time at the bottom of the porch steps. Her face was blotchy and streaked with mascara. "Mom would be ashamed of you, Sarah. She would be absolutely heartbroken to see what a monster you have become." That was the lowest blow she could strike. She knew how much I loved our mother. She knew that the fear of disappointing Mom was the very thing that had kept me under Linda's thumb for so long. But as I looked down at her from the porch, I didn't feel hurt. I felt a strange, quiet peace. I knew what Mom would have wanted. Mom would have wanted me to have a life. She would have wanted me to be safe. She would have wanted the daughter who sacrificed everything for her to finally have a place of her own. I think Mom would be proud, I said softly. I think she would be proud that I finally learned how to stand up for the home she worked so hard to give me. Linda didn't have a comeback for that. She just let out a frustrated growl, turned on her heel, and marched toward the van. She slammed the passenger door so hard the whole vehicle rocked on its tires. I stood on the porch and watched as the minivan backed out of my driveway. I watched Gary struggle with the steering, his eyes fixed on the rearview mirror. I watched the boxes in the back window shift as they hit the dip at the end of the curb. And then, they were gone. The silver minivan turned the corner and disappeared behind a row of neatly trimmed hedges. The sound of the engine faded away, replaced by the normal sounds of the morning. A woodpecker was drumming on a tree in the backyard. The neighbor's lawnmower started up again. Everything looked the same as it had 30 minutes ago, but the world felt entirely different. I walked back into the house and locked the door. I did not feel triumphant. I did not feel like a hero in a movie who had just defeated the villain. Mostly, I just felt tired. I felt a deep, bone-weary exhaustion that seemed to seep into my very soul. I went into the kitchen. My coffee was cold now. I stood at the counter and looked at the 2 empty mugs I had set out, thinking I might actually have a conversation with my sister. I picked them up and put them back in the cabinet. I sat down in Mom's chair by the window. I expected to feel guilty. I waited for that familiar, nagging voice in the back of my head to tell me that I was a bad person, that I should have been more generous, that I should have found a way to make it work. But the voice was silent. Instead, I felt the weight of the house around me. It was a good weight. It felt like a warm blanket on a cold night. I looked at the sunlight hitting the hardwood floors that I had polished myself. I looked at the photos on the mantel. I realized that for the first time in my life I was truly safe. I had done the right thing, even though it was the hardest thing I had ever done. I spent the rest of the day in a sort of daze. I did not answer the phone. I did not go out for the mail. I just sat in the quiet and let the reality of my new life sink in. I had said no. I had drawn a line in the sand, and the world had not ended. The sky had not fallen. The house was still standing. It was only later, as the sun began to set and the shadows grew long across the living room rug, that I realized this was only the beginning. Linda would not let this go. A woman like Linda does not lose a $450,000 house without a fight. I was right, of course. But that night, as I climbed into bed and listened to the peaceful silence of my home, I knew I was ready for whatever was coming next. I had earned this peace, and I would protect it with everything I had. 3 weeks. For 3 weeks, the house was a sanctuary of perfect, uninterrupted peace. I woke up every morning to the sound of the birds. I drank my coffee by the window, watching the squirrels play in the branches of the big oak tree. I thought the storm had passed. I thought that by saying no on that Tuesday morning, I had closed the book on Linda forever. I was wrong. I was so incredibly wrong. It was a Monday afternoon when the mail truck pulled up to the curb. Our mailman, a kind man named Mr. Henderson, who had been on this route for 15 years, did not just drop the mail in the box and drive away. He climbed out of his truck and walked up the driveway with a clipboard in his hand. My heart did a strange little dance in my chest. I knew what that clipboard meant. Certified mail. I opened the door, and Mr. Henderson gave me a sympathetic look. "Afternoon, Sarah. I have something here that requires a signature." I signed the electronic pad with a trembling hand. He handed me a large, thick envelope. It was white, with a professional return address from a law firm in the city where Linda lived. The firm was called Harrison and Associates. I did not know them, but the weight of the paper told me everything I needed to know. I walked back into the kitchen and sat at the table. I sat there for a long time, just staring at the envelope. I did not want to open it. I knew that once I broke that seal, my life would never be the same again. Finally, I picked up a butter knife and sliced the top of the envelope. I pulled out a stack of papers. They were cold. They were formal. They were filled with the kind of legal jargon that is designed to make a person feel small and powerless. At the very top, in bold letters, it said, "Petition to contest will." I felt the blood drain from my face. I read the words, but my brain refused to process them. Linda was suing me. My own sister was taking me to probate court. I skipped down to the section titled Grounds for Challenge. That is where I found the bomb. Linda was alleging that I had exercised something called undue influence over our mother during her final months. The words on the page were like physical blows. The petition claimed that I had isolated our mother from her family. It claimed that I had used Mom's declining mental state to manipulate her into changing her will. It even suggested that I had withheld medical care or food to force her to sign the house over to me. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. Undue influence. It was a disgusting, filthy accusation. The petition stated that the house, which was valued at over $450,000, should be sold and the proceeds split equally between the two of us. It also demanded that I pay Linda's legal fees because of my supposed fraudulent behavior. I read the letter 3 times. Every time I read it, I felt a new layer of betrayal. How could she? How could she sit in her house hundreds of miles away and claim that Mom was not in her right mind? Mom was brilliant. Mom was sharp until the very last week. She knew exactly what she was doing when she left this house to me. She did it because she wanted to make sure I had a roof over my head after I gave up everything to be her caregiver. And the accusation of isolation. That was the cruelest part. I didn't isolate Mom. Linda isolated herself. She was the one who didn't pick up the phone. She was the one who sent back the letters. She was the one who chose a cruise over a hospital visit. I looked around the kitchen. Suddenly, the house did not feel like a sanctuary anymore. It felt like a target. I looked at the cabinets I had painted. I looked at the floor I had scrubbed. Linda wanted to take all of it. She wanted to sell it to the highest bidder and walk away with $225,000 that she had done absolutely nothing to earn. I realized then that this was why she had shown up with the minivan. She didn't just want a room. She was scouting the property. She was measuring the value of the prize. When I told her no, she didn't give up. She just went to a lawyer who was willing to help her lie. I knew that defending myself against a lawsuit, even a baseless one, would cost a fortune. I would have to hire a lawyer. I would have to go to court. I would have to spend months, maybe even years, fighting for the house that was already mine. I felt a deep, crushing sense of injustice. I had done everything right. I had been the good daughter. I had sacrificed my savings, my time, and my health. And now, the reward for my devotion was a legal battle that threatened to bankrupt me. I sat in the darkening kitchen until the sun went down. I did not turn on the lights. I just sat there with those cold white papers in my lap, realizing that the sister I once loved was gone. In her place was a stranger who was willing to destroy my life for a paycheck. The next morning, I did not cry. I did not have time to cry. I had work to do. I went down to the basement. It was a cool, damp space that smelled of old boxes and laundry detergent. In the far corner, tucked behind the holiday decorations, was a stack of plastic bins. Most people saw those bins as clutter. I saw them as my fortress. You see, I am a woman of the records. I have always been that way. My husband used to tease me about it. He called me the human filing cabinet. Whenever we bought a toaster, I kept the receipt. Whenever we went to the doctor, I asked for a printout of the visit. I did not do it because I expected to be sued. I did it because I like order. I like knowing the facts. I carried the bins up to the kitchen table one by one. I spent the next 6 hours organizing my life. I had everything. I had a daily calendar for the last 2 years. In that calendar, I had recorded every single event of our mother's illness. I had written down the time of every medication dose. I had recorded her blood pressure, her oxygen levels, and what she ate for lunch. But I also had the things that Linda didn't expect. I had the pharmacy receipts, hundreds of them. They were organized by date. They showed exactly when I had picked up her prescriptions. They showed that I was the only one paying for them. I had the emails. I had printed out every single communication between my mum's team of doctors at the university hospital and me. Those emails showed me asking detailed, intelligent questions. They showed the doctors praising the level of care she was receiving at home. I had the photographs. I had taken pictures of Mom's medication organizers every Sunday night for 14 months. Why? Because I wanted to make sure I didn't miss a dose. But now, those photos were proof of my diligence. And then, I found the most important folder of all. It was a slim blue folder labeled Legal and Financial. Inside was the contact information for our mother's longtime attorney, a woman named Mrs. Gable. Mrs. Gable had been our family lawyer for 20 years. She was a woman of impeccable reputation. She was the one who had drafted the final version of the will. I called Mrs. Gable's office at 10 o'clock sharp. When she got on the phone, her voice was warm but professional. "Sarah, it is good to hear from you. I was so sorry to hear about your mother's passing." "Thank you, Mrs. Gable," I said. "I wish I were calling under better circumstances. My sister, Linda, has filed a petition to contest the will. She is claiming undue influence." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear Mrs. Gable's brain working. "Undue influence?" she finally said. Her voice had turned as sharp as a needle. "That is a very serious and very mistaken allegation. I met with your mother 3 times before she signed that document. I met with her alone, Sarah. I made sure of that. I performed the standard competency evaluations myself. Your mother was as sharp as a tack until the day she passed. I felt a huge weight lift off my chest. I need you to come in, Sarah," Mrs. Gable continued. "Bring everything you have. Bring the medical records. Bring the journals. And bring those receipts. We are going to build a wall of evidence so high that no judge in this state will even consider Linda's claim." I spent the rest of the day preparing my defense. I bought the 3-ring binders and a set of dividers. I organized the evidence chronologically. Tab 1, Medical History. Tab 2, Financial Contributions. Tab 3, Communication with Family. In Tab 3, I put the logs of my phone calls. I showed the dozens of times I had called Linda's cell phone and house phone, only for the calls to go to voicemail. I included the tracking numbers for the certified letters I had sent that were returned as refused. I realized as I was filing the papers that Linda had made a fatal mistake. She thought she was fighting the sister who always said yes. She thought she was fighting a woman who would be too intimidated by a lawyer to fight back. But she wasn't fighting that woman. She was fighting a caregiver. And a caregiver is a person who knows how to survive. A caregiver is a person who has seen the worst parts of life and kept going anyway. I looked at the thick binders sitting on the kitchen table. They represented 14 months of my life. They represented every sleepless night, every tear, and every prayer I had whispered in the dark. Linda thought she could take this house because she saw it as an asset. She saw it as $450,000. I saw it as the place where I had earned my soul. I went to bed that night feeling a strange sense of confidence. The legal battle would be expensive. It would be draining. It would cost me $8,000 in retainer fees just to get started. But as I closed my eyes, I knew I was ready. I had the truth on my side. And in a court of law, the truth is the only thing that actually matters. I would protect my mother's legacy. I would protect my home. And I would show Linda that some things are not for sale. I sat in the office of Mrs. Gable, our family attorney. Her office was in a beautiful old building downtown, the kind with high ceilings, crown molding, and the faint, comforting scent of old paper and furniture wax. Mrs. Gable sat behind a large mahogany desk that looked like it had been there since the 1950s. She had her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose, as she pored over the legal complaint Linda had filed against me. "Sarah," she said, her voice calm and measured. "In a case like this, the devil is always in the details. Your sister is making very broad accusations. She is claiming that you coerced your mother. She is claiming that your mother did not have the mental capacity to understand what she was signing." She tapped a specific paragraph on the 3rd page of the document. "But here," Mrs. Gable continued, Here is where Linda has painted herself into a corner. Look at the timeline she has provided to the court. I leaned in and read the paragraph. In her sworn statement, Linda had claimed that our mother began suffering from severe cognitive decline and unclear thinking starting in June, in the summer of the year before she passed away. Linda claimed that from that point forward, Mom was no longer able to make her own decisions and was entirely under my dark influence. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It was a mix of a cold chill and a sudden, sharp clarity. "The summer of last year," I whispered. I remembered that summer perfectly. It was a hot, humid summer. The cicadas were loud in the trees, and the air was thick with the scent of blooming honeysuckle. That was the summer Mom decided she wanted to settle her accounts with the world. Not her bank accounts, her emotional ones. Linda chose that specific summer, I told Mrs. Gable, because that was the summer she went on that 3-week cruise to the Mediterranean. She was completely out of touch. She was thousands of miles away. I think she chose that time because she assumed that since she was not here to see Mom, she could simply invent whatever version of reality suited her lawsuit. Mrs. Gable smiled. It was a small, knowing smile. "And was your mother confused during that time, Sarah? Was she unable to think for herself?" "Quite the opposite," I said. I thought back to those long July afternoons. Mom would sit out on the screened-in porch, right in her favorite cedar chair. She had a small folding table set up in front of her. On that table was her favorite stationery, the ivory-colored paper with the little blue forget-me, not flowers in the corner. Mom spent hours that summer writing. She said she wanted to reach out to the people who had meant something to her over the years. She wrote to her sister, Aunt Martha, in Virginia. She wrote to her old college roommate, Betty, in Arizona. She wrote to our cousin, David, who was serving in the military. She wrote letters, Mrs. Gable, I said. Dozens of them. They were not the letters of a confused woman. They were articulate. They were detailed. They were full of humor and old memories and very specific advice. I remembered watching her write. Her hand was a little shaky, yes, but her mind was like a diamond. Hard, clear, and bright. She would ask me for the correct spelling of a name from 30 years ago, or she would remind me to mention a specific event that had happened in the 1970s. Linda's mistake was thinking that because she was silent, the rest of the world was silent too. She thought she could claim Mom was incapacitated because there were no medical records to prove otherwise for those specific months. But Linda forgot about the power of the written word. She forgot about the friends and family members who had received those letters. She forgot that in our family, people save things. We save the things that matter. "I need those letters, Sarah," Mrs. Gable said. Her eyes were sparkling now. "I need you to call every person on that list. Ask them if they still have the letters your mother sent them that summer. If they do, ask for a high-quality photocopy or a scan. We are going to show the court that while Linda was on a cruise ship, your mother was busy being the most brilliant version of herself." I walked out of that office feeling like I was walking on air. I realized that Linda had been so blinded by her own greed that she had become sloppy. She had assumed that I was alone in that house with a dying woman, and that it would be my word against hers. She did not realize that Mom was still speaking. Even though she was gone, her voice was still there, written in blue ink on ivory paper, waiting to be heard. I went home and picked up the phone. I started making calls. And as I spoke to Aunt Martha and Betty and David, I realized something beautiful. Not only did they have the letters, but they were eager to share them. They loved Mom, they respected her, and they were absolutely horrified that Linda was trying to drag her memory through the mud for a paycheck. Linda had made a fatal mistake. She had challenged the one thing that she could never defeat, to the truth. Within a week, the envelopes began to arrive in my mailbox. They were not like the cold, white legal envelopes Linda's lawyer sent. These were colorful. They were filled with love. I sat at my kitchen table, the same table where my mother used to eat her breakfast, and I began to open them. Aunt Martha had sent 3 letters. Betty from Arizona had sent 5. Cousin David had sent a long 4-page letter that Mom had written to him about the importance of family and honor. As I read the words, I felt like my mother was sitting right there next to me. I could hear her voice in every sentence. I could hear her specific way of phrasing things. I could hear her sharp wit and her deep, abiding love for this house. In a letter to Betty, dated July 14th of that summer, Mom had written, "Sarah is such a blessing to me, Betty. I do not know what I would do without her. She has given up so much to stay here and care for me. I am making sure that this house stays with her. It is the only way I can think of to thank her for the life she is giving back to me. I want her to have a place where she is always safe, always secure." I had to stop reading for a moment. My eyes were so full of tears that the words were blurring on the page. There it was, in her own handwriting, written on July 14th, the very month Linda claimed Mom was confused and incapacitated. Mom was not confused at all. She was making a plan. She was expressing her deliberate, conscious will to a third party who had no stake in the inheritance. That is what the law calls contemporaneous evidence. It is the strongest kind of evidence there is because it was created at the time of the events, with no knowledge that it would ever be used in a court of law. I gathered all the letters. I made copies for myself and sent the originals to Mrs. Gable by a secure courier. The following Tuesday, Mrs. Gable sent a formal response to Linda's attorney. She did not just send a letter, she sent a mountain of evidence. She included the medical records I had kept. She included the pharmacy receipts. And she included copies of the letters from that summer. She also included a very short, very firm cover letter. It stated that if Linda did not withdraw her petition immediately, we would move for a frivolous lawsuit designation. We would ask the court to make Linda pay for every single penny of my legal fees, and we would potentially pursue a countersuit for defamation of character. Then we waited. The silence from Linda's side was deafening. 1 week passed. 2 weeks passed. 3 weeks passed. I can only imagine what happened in that lawyer's office in the city. I can imagine Linda sitting there, looking at our mother's handwriting. I can imagine her realizing that she could not win. You cannot argue with a dead woman's own words. You cannot claim someone is incompetent when they are writing beautiful, complex letters to their friends about the meaning of life. The voice from the beyond had spoken. Mom had protected me one last time. Finally, on a Friday afternoon, Mrs. Gable called me. "Sarah," she said, and I could hear the triumph in her voice. "It is over. Linda has officially withdrawn her petition. The case is dismissed with prejudice, which means she can never file it again." I sat down in Mom's chair. I felt a wave of relief so powerful that I thought my heart might stop. "There is more," Mrs. Gable said. "Because the evidence we provided was so overwhelming, Linda's attorney has agreed to a settlement regarding the legal fees. Linda will be responsible for $6,000 of your costs. It is not everything, but it is a significant victory." I thanked her. I hung up the phone, and I just sat there, in the quiet house. I looked at the ivory stationery still sitting in the desk drawer. I realized that Linda's greed had actually given me a gift I never expected. It had forced me to reach out to old family and friends. It had brought those letters back into my life. It had given me a chance to hear my mother's voice one more time, telling me that she loved me and that I had done a good job. Linda had tried to use the law to steal my home. But the law is not just about rules and regulations. At its best, the law is about the truth. And the truth was that I had earned this house through love and sacrifice. I walked out to the backyard and stood under the big oak tree. I looked up at the branches spreading wide against the blue sky. I felt like the house was breathing again. The target was gone. The threat was over. I had said no to my sister. I had said yes to myself. And I had let my mother have the final word. I was 63 years old. And for the first time in my life, I truly understood what it meant to be free. It was a Sunday night. About 6 weeks after the legal battle had come to its sudden, quiet end. The neighborhood was settled into that deep, heavy silence that only happens late on a Sunday. The weekend was over. People were tucked away in their homes, preparing for the coming week. I was sitting in the living room with just one small lamp on. I was reading a book, But my mind was wandering. I was thinking about how quiet the house felt. It was a different kind of quiet now. It was not the tense, waiting silence of the summer. It was a peaceful silence. It was the kind of silence you find in a church after everyone has gone home. Suddenly, the phone on the side table began to vibrate. The sound was startling in the quiet room. I picked it up and looked at the screen. My heart skipped a beat. It was Linda. I sat there with the phone in my hand, feeling it hum against my palm. I watched the screen glow in the darkened room. It rang once, then twice, then 3 times. I thought about all the thousands of times I had picked up the phone for her over the last 60 years. I thought about the midnight calls when she was in trouble. I thought about the calls when she wanted money. I thought about the calls when she just wanted to complain about her life. Every single time, I had picked up without hesitation. Every single time I had asked myself, how can I help her? I never stopped to ask what it was costing me. I never stopped to ask if I had anything left to give. I thought about the silver minivan in my driveway. I thought about that cold white envelope from the lawyers. I thought about the things she had said to me on the porch, the way she called me a monster. The phone rang a 4th time. I realized then that the power had shifted. I was no longer the girl who had to answer. I was the woman who chose to answer. I swiped the screen and put the phone to my ear. I did not say hello. I did not offer a greeting. I just waited. I dropped the lawsuit, she said. Her voice was flat. It was tired. It sounded much older than I remembered it. There was no fire in it. There was no anger. It was just the voice of a woman who had finally run out of energy to fight. I know, I said. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear her breathing. It was a shallow, ragged sound. I need you to know something, she said finally. I need you to know that I understand what I did. Not just last month. Not just with the lawyers. I mean everything. She paused, and I heard a muffled sound, like she was rubbing her eyes. The 3 years of silence, she continued. The hospital, the funeral, all of it. I know I failed you, Sarah. I know I failed Mom. I was selfish, and I was scared, and I let my own mess become an excuse to abandon the people who loved me. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. My throat felt like it was filled with dry sand. I had waited 3 years to hear those words. I had imagined this conversation 1,000 times. In some versions, I was generous and forgiving. In other versions, I was cold and triumphant. But sitting there in the dark, I didn't feel either of those things. I just felt a profound sense of sadness. I was sad for the 60 years we had wasted. I was sad for the sisterhood that had been hollowed out by greed. I don't expect you to forgive me, Linda said softly. I really don't. I just needed to say it out loud. I needed someone to know that I am not blind to what I have become. I thought about what I wanted to say. I thought about the binders of evidence sitting on my kitchen table. I thought about the letters from Aunt Martha. I realized that the truth had already done its work. I didn't need to pile on. I didn't need to punish her. Her life was her punishment. I hear you, Linda, I said. She exhaled a long, slow sound. It was like a balloon losing its air. I am not ready to talk about the rest of it yet, I continued. I am not ready to go back to the way things were. I do not know if I ever will be. There has been too much damage. Too many words were said that cannot be taken back. That is fair, she whispered. That is more than fair. We didn't talk for long after that. There wasn't much left to say. The legal battle was over. The house was safe. The truth was out in the open. Good night, Sarah, she said. Good night, Linda, I replied. I hung up the phone and set it back on the table. I sat there for a long time, watching the moon move across the sky. I realized that forgiveness is not a one-time event. It is a process. And sometimes, that process starts with a simple acknowledgement. I had learned something very important in the preceding months. I could not control what Linda chose to do with her life. I could not control her greed or her desperation. I could only control what I chose to do with mine. I had set a boundary. I had protected my home, and in doing so, I had forced Linda to finally look in the mirror. Whether she changed or not was up to her. But I was no longer responsible for her reflection. I walked to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. The house felt warm. It felt solid. I was 63 years old, and for the first time in my life, I felt like the captain of my own ship. The middle of the night call didn't leave me shaking. It didn't leave me crying. It just left me at peace. The next morning, the sun came up bright and clear. It was a beautiful autumn day. The leaves on the big oak tree in the yard were turning gold and deep red. I sat at my kitchen table and opened my checkbook. I wrote a check to Mrs. Gable for $8,000. It was the final payment for her services. As I signed my name at the bottom of that check, I did not feel any resentment. Most people would think it was a tragedy to have to spend $8,000 of their retirement savings just to keep a house they already own. But I didn't see it that way. I saw it as an investment in my peace. I saw it as the price of my freedom. I was paying for the right to wake up in this kitchen every morning for the rest of my life. I was paying for the right to never have to open my door to someone who did not respect me. I put the check in an envelope, licked the stamp, and walked it down to the mailbox. When I came back, I didn't go inside right away. Instead, I walked out to the middle of the yard and stood under the oak tree. My father had planted this tree when I was only 4 years old. I remember him digging the hole. I remember him telling me that a tree is like a person. If you give it good soil and enough room to grow, it will eventually be able to withstand any storm. The tree was enormous now. Its branches spread wide across the yard, providing shade and shelter. It had survived droughts. It had survived blizzards. It had even survived a lightning strike back in the 1990s. I leaned my back against the rough bark of the trunk. I felt the strength of the wood. I thought about what it means to truly own something. Linda thought that owning a house was about a piece of paper. She thought it was about division and shares and dollar amounts. She thought it was something you could take through a lawsuit. But she was wrong. This house was mine because I had shown up for it. It was mine because I had sat in the quiet rooms with a dying woman and made sure she felt loved. It was mine because I had scrubbed the floors and painted the walls and tended to the garden when I was exhausted. It was mine because I had the courage to say no when everyone expected me to say yes. You don't own a home because a will says so. You own a home because you have poured your heart and soul into the foundation. No judge and no lawyer can ever take that away. A few months later, Linda and I spoke again. It was a short conversation. She asked how I was doing. I told her I was doing well. I asked how she was. She told me she had found a small apartment and Gary had found some steady work at a local warehouse. The conversation was careful. It was like two people learning to walk on ground that had just been repaired after an earthquake. We were testing every step before we shifted our weight. There was no warmth yet. There was no laughter. Maybe there would be someday. Maybe there wouldn't. I was 63 years old, and I had made peace with not knowing how certain things end. What I did know was this. I had stood in my doorway at 7:30 on a Tuesday morning, and I had refused to step aside. I had protected my home, my peace, and my dignity. And the world had not fallen down. The oak tree was still standing. The coffee still tasted like mornings. And I was still here. I walked back into my house and sat in my mother's chair by the window. I watched the afternoon light move across the floor. I felt a deep, abiding sense of gratitude. I had earned this. I had earned every single quiet second of this life. If there is one thing I want to leave you with today, it is this. Do not be afraid to say no. Do not be afraid to protect what you have built. Your peace is not a luxury. It is a necessity. And the moment you decide that you are worth the effort of protection, everything in your life will start to change. It does not have to be a loud battle. It does not have to be a dramatic scene. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is just stand your ground and wait for the storm to pass. I looked out at the yard one last time before the sun went down. The oak tree looked strong. The house looked beautiful. And for the first time in a very long time, I knew exactly where I belonged. I am Sarah. This is my home. and I am finally at peace. If you have stayed with me from the very beginning of this journey, thank you. I know that stories like these are not always easy to hear. They can be heavy. They can be painful. They pull at our heartstrings, because so many of us have lived through something similar. Most of us have had a Linda in our lives at some point. Most of us have spent years, decades, being the one who always says yes. But if there is one thing I want you to take away from my story today, it is this. The moment you decide that your home, your peace, and your dignity are worth protecting, is the moment everything starts to change. It does not have to be a loud confrontation. It does not have to be a dramatic scene with shouting and tears. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is just stand in your doorway at 7:30 in the morning and refuse to step aside. That is enough. It has always been enough. For 60 years. I thought that being a good person meant letting everyone else walk over me. I thought that being a good sister meant carrying the weight that someone else chose to drop. But at 63 years old, I finally learned the truth. True kindness is not about being a doormat. It is about having the courage to say no, so that your yes actually means something. My mother's house is quiet now. The oak tree is still standing, and my life belongs to me again. I hope that if you are facing a similar storm in your own life, you find the strength to hold your ground. Your sanctuary is worth the fight. Your peace of mind is worth every penny of a legal bill. And your future, no matter how many years you have left, is yours to define. Before we say goodbye for today, please take a moment to drop a comment and let me know where you are watching from. Whether you are in a small town in Maine, a quiet suburb in Texas, or looking out at the mountains in Washington state. I want to hear from you. Knowing that we are all connected through these shared experiences makes this community so special. If this story meant something to you, or if you think it might help someone else who is struggling to find their voice, please share it with them. Let them know they are not alone. Thank you for spending your time with me today. It is a privilege to share these lessons with you. I am Sarah, and I am finally, truly, home. I will see you in the next one.